Okay, let's jump in. We are doing a deep dive today into the Gilded Age. It's one of those really transformative periods in American history, 1865 to about 1898, but also just full of contradictions.
Absolutely.
Our mission, really, is to get past that shiny surface and understand the tension, between the huge industrial growth and, well, the pretty immense social problems that came with it.
Yeah.
And the name itself, Gilded Age, which Mark Twain helped make famous,
Yeah.
that's maybe the best clue we have right off the
He
bat.
really is.
It's not golden, right?
That's sad.
Gilded? That implies someone's trying to make things look better than they actually are, like putting a thin coat of gold on something less valuable.
It's the perfect metaphor, honestly, because it captures that structural gap, a shiny surface hiding some deep, deep problems underneath.
Right.
You had industrial capitalism just exploding, creating incredible economic expansion, huge fortunes for a very, very small number of people. But at the exact same time, this process dramatically widened the gap between that wealthy elite and, well, everybody else, the working masses. The scale of the divide was unprecedented.
So let's maybe look at that golden part first, the facade, because the sources do show it wasn't all bad for everyone, right? We know the gap widened, but living standards did improve for a lot of people.
That's true.
Workers' real wages, generally speaking, went up. Your dollar could actually buy more stuff than it could before.
That's the paradox, exactly. While inequality was shooting up, you had technology and economies of scale making almost everything cheaper. Mass production made goods accessible in a way they just hadn't been before for many working families.
And how people got those goods changed dramatically, too. This is where you see things like mail-order catalogs really taking off.
Oh, yeah.
Huge. Companies like Montgomery Ward, starting way back in 1872, and then Sears, Roebuck in the 1890s, they basically revolutionized shopping, especially if you lived out in the country, right?
Right.
You could suddenly bypass the local store, which might have been expensive, and get access to all this modern stuff. It was a real, tangible increase in purchasing power for many.
But, and this is the crucial thing to analyze, having more purchasing power isn't the same as having economic security.
Good point.
So yeah, the average person might be able to buy a cheaper shovel or a new coat, but the elite, they were busy mastering this art of showing off immense wealth that completely insulated them from, say, economic downturns. Which brings us to the economist Thorstein Veblen. He coined that famous term, conspicuous consumption.
Right. Spending money just to show you have money.
Precisely. It's the public display of wealth purely for social status, not for need or function. And we need a concrete example here, I think. Think about Cornelius Vanderbilt, people like that. They weren't just building big houses.
No.
They were building palaces. Like the Biltmore House, that was a vacation home.
A vacation home.
Yeah. 175,000 square feet. It had something like 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms. I mean, that's not about needing space.
No. To stay.
It's about demonstrating a scale of wealth that was just unimaginable for most people, built to show off capital.
And that contrast is so important. Function versus just pure status. So you have that kind of insulated massive wealth on one side, and on the other, the working class. Even if their wages bought a bit more, they were living right on the edge, financially speaking.
Absolutely.
So when the economy tanked, like during the panics of 1873 or 1893, what happened? Workers faced huge wage cuts, unemployment.
While the Vanderbilts and their, were largely untouched.
Exactly. That access to slightly cheaper goods meant nothing when you lost your job entirely. No safety net.
And you could argue the working class paid for that economic boom twice. Once through those low wages and job instability.
And the second time.
Through the absolutely brutal conditions they endured to produce those cheap goods in the first place.
Right. Okay, so if that was the sort of gilded promise, let's look underneath at the reality of work itself. Read about factory work, mining, railroads. It sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was. Brutally unforgiving is a good way to put it. Safety measures were minimal, if they existed at all.
So injury rates, death rates.
Terribly high. And workers had almost no legal recourse, no real protection. They bore all the risk of this new industrial machinery. And this danger wasn't just for adults. We absolutely have to talk about child labor. It's a defining crisis of the era.
Yeah.
The sources are pretty clear. By the end of the 19th century, almost 18% of the entire industrial workforce were children.
18%. Let that sink in for a moment. That's nearly 1 in 5 workers.
Some as young as 10, facing the exact same dangers as adults in those factories and mines.
But for less pay, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. Less pay and zero power, which really highlights the fundamental power imbalance back then.
Why did individual workers have so little sway?
Because they were replaceable. Simple as that. Employers could easily find someone else, often drawing from this huge pool of new immigrants who were desperate for any kind of work.
So if you complained or got hurt,
You are out. Someone else would take your job tomorrow. This constant threat, combined with the danger, really forced workers to think about organizing collectively. It was the only option left.
which leads us straight into the rise of labor unions. Collective bargaining became, well, essential if workers were going to have any leverage at all against these huge corporations. Long hours, low pay.
Right.
But the sources show us there wasn't just one way workers tried to organize. There were different groups, different ideas about the best path forward.
Yeah, and this is where you see sort of different philosophies emerging in the labor movement. Some groups were aiming for really big structural changes to the whole system.
Okay.
Others were much more focused on, let's say, practical, immediate gains, but maybe only for certain types of workers.
Okay, let's break that down. Who were the big players aiming for that larger structural change?
Well, first you have the Knights of Labor, started back in 1869. They were remarkably inclusive for the time.
How?
They welcomed skilled and unskilled workers. They welcomed women, African Americans. Their vision was huge.
What were they calling for?
Things like ending child labor completely, breaking up monopolies, getting an 8-hour workday. They fundamentally wanted to transform capitalism.
Ambitious.
Very. And in that same vein, also founded in 1869, you had the Colored National Labor Union, the CNLU. Isaac Myers was a key founder.
And their focus?
Specifically advocating for Black workers' rights, better conditions, but also, crucially, land reform. They saw economic justice and civil rights as deeply connected, with land ownership being key to stability.
Okay, so those are two examples of broad, almost revolutionary aims. What was the alternative approach?
That would be the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, led by Samuel Gompers for a long time.
They were different how?
The AFL was all about pragmatism, narrow focus. They wanted concrete economic gains, higher wages, safer workplaces, but specifically for skilled craft workers.
Ah, so not the unskilled laborers.
Generally, no. They excluded them and largely avoided broader political goals. The idea was that skilled workers had specific leverage because their skills were valuable, and they could use that to negotiate better deals within the existing system rather than trying to overthrow it.
Interesting distinction. Skilled versus unskilled. Broad reform versus immediate gains.
And we should also remember, resistance wasn't just happening in factories in the North.
Right.
Think about the Southwest. There, the power struggle often revolved around land. Wealthy landowners, railroad companies encroaching on traditional land rights, particularly of Mexican Americans.
So how do people resist that?
You had groups like Las Guardas Blancas, the White Caps,
Yeah.
led by figures like Juan Jose Herrera. They used direct action.
Like what?
Cutting fences on land they felt was unjustly taken, sometimes destroying property. It was about defending their land and livelihoods against that same kind of concentrated economic power, just playing out in a different, more rural context.
So whether it's factories or farmlands, you have this growing tension, this pushback against concentrated power. It feels like major conflict was almost unavoidable.
It really was. And the next couple of decades are defined by exactly that conflict.
And looking at the sources on these conflicts, there's a pattern that just jumps out, doesn't it?
Absolutely undeniable. When labor unrest boiled over into strikes, protests, sometimes violence, the federal government consistently stepped in.
And whose side did they take?
Overwhelmingly, they sided with the business interests, often violently. This is maybe the most critical takeaway about labor in the Gilded Age. We have to look at the big conflicts to see it clearly. First, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877.
What kicked that off?
Wage cuts by the railroads, but it spread like wildfire across 11 states, eventually shutting down something like 60% of the nation's railroads. A massive disruption.
60%. How did the government handle that?
President Rutherford B. Hayes didn't hesitate. He sent in federal troops.
Troops against striking workers.
Yes, to suppress the strike by force. Over 100 people were killed in the clashes that followed. The message couldn't have been clearer.
Property rights over workers' rights.
Precisely. Corporate property rights were paramount. Then, fast forward about 9 years, Haymarket Affair, 1886, Chicago.
I know that one. It started peacefully, right?
Yeah,
A rally for the 8-hour day.
exactly. But then, someone threw a bomb. Chaos erupted. Police fired into the crowd. People died on both sides.
And the fallout.
Even though the bomb thrower was likely an anarchist, maybe not even connected to the main organizers, the backlash was directed squarely at the labor movement itself, especially the Knights of Labor.
The inclusive group we talked about earlier.
Yes, public opinion turned against them, fueled by fears of radicalism. Haymarket basically destroyed the Knights of Labor as a major force. It crippled that broad, inclusive vision of labor organizing.
So a tragedy used to undermine the movement. And the third big one.
The Pullman Strike, 1894. Another one sparked by wage cuts during an economic downturn. George Pullman cut wages in his factory town near Chicago, but he didn't lower the rents or prices in the company's stores.
Squeezing them from both ends.
Exactly. The workers walked out, led by the American Railway Union under Eugene V. Debs. It spread nationally, halting railroad traffic.
And the government response? Again?
Predictable by this point, but maybe even more blatant. The railroad owners got clever. They started attaching Pullman sleeper cars to U.S. mail trains.
Why would they do that?
Because interfering with the mail is a federal crime. It gave President Cleveland the pretext he needed to send in troops, arguing the strike was obstructing federal mail delivery.
Wow, so they weaponized the mail system.
Essentially, yes. Massive federal intervention, violence, the strike was crushed, and Eugene V. Debs was arrested and jailed.
Just incredible. These three events, 1877, Haymarket, Pullman, they paint a really stark picture, don't they?
They absolutely do. They demonstrate beyond any doubt that during the Gilded Age, the federal government prioritized corporate interests and property rights far above the rights and well-being of working people. Force was the ultimate answer to labor demands.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together. Going back to that initial idea, the gilded metaphor.
Yeah.
It feels incredibly apt. You had real progress, didn't you?
Yeah.
Cheaper goods, new technologies, catalogs, bringing things to people.
Yeah.
A definite shine on the surface for some.
Absolutely. Real material improvements existed, but coexisting right alongside that was this deep structural inequality, incredibly dangerous working conditions, and a government that actively helped maintain that unequal structure.
The government helped keep the veneer polished, you could say.
That's a good way to put it. Polished while ignoring or even suppressing the problems underneath.
So, thinking about this for you, our listener, what does it all mean today? You know, the basic structure of our economy, a lot of it was forged in this period. So consider this. If people could buy more things, if access to new stuff was expanding, why did that gap between the wealthy, the owners, and the working majority just keep getting wider? The Gilded Age seems to show that just being able to buy cheaper stuff doesn't fix fundamental unfairness.
Right. The sources really show that while, yes, the average person might get a new catalog in the mail, the core conflict, the struggle between organized labor trying to get collective power and concentrated corporate power trying to keep that bow, that conflict was consistently settled by government force siding with capital.
Yeah.
And that leaves us with a pretty important question to chew on, I think. When an era promises prosperity through consumption, through cheaper goods, but the underlying inequality is actively maintained, maybe even enforced, how likely, or maybe how inevitable, is organized conflict then?